Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I just wanted to talk a little bit today with Francesca Maxime. I'm so glad to have her on with us. She's been exploring in 6 million different directions the human situation, including diversity, including the indigenous situation, including all different types of therapy models and how to address our journey that we're all on together. And right now we're in the middle of this unprecedented in any of our lifetimes situation with the coronavirus, COVID-19, and how's that affecting our clients and ourselves, and what we might bring up in our, in our exploration as therapists, like how can we truly be effective in the situation. But kind of wanted to highlight a little bit about some of the people that are being affected by this. I mean, everybody's affected, but some people are in the front lines of it in a way due to the wealth gap or due to the jobs that they can get right now that might put them in the front lines of the virus, whether they're delivery people through Uber or, all the different food services, whether they're helping out Amazon packages get to you, whether they're in the medical profession or helpers there. Sometimes it really makes a difference. And a lot of times talking about like single moms, that what happens if they get sick? What happens to the kids with this situation where we can't really be physically close to each other? And even the domestic violence phone calls have gone up because sometimes volatile people are in small spaces with their spouses or their kids, and that creates problems. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that may not be getting addressed so much on media. Certainly the wealth gap. A lot of Americans aren't so great at saving. I mean, we need to be better at saving, I think, in general, as a ideally, if we can, as a country. But some people are living paycheck to paycheck, and they're working really hard. They're doing 3 jobs instead of 1, and they're just trying to make it. And then when something hits like this, where they might lose all of their jobs or some of their jobs, they have not much to fall back on. I know we have some relief coming through the government, but it's going to be a little bit not enough at this point. So let's talk. Francesca, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I do want to mention your website, Maxime Clarity, and that's MAXIME, and then the word clarity.com, MAXIME, clarity.com. And then she also has many podcasts available that you can check out too as resources. But let's just have a little chat, if you will, about some of the dire circumstances that some of our marginalized populations are facing right now.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Thank you for that. This COVID pandemic definitely is hitting different populations differently. I live here in New York City. I live in Brooklyn. I'm in Brooklyn right now.
So you're in the epicenter of it in the United States right now.
I am, and you'll hear the sirens going by regularly in the background. And Queens and the Bronx are really the hardest hit. Manhattan, not quite so much, although it's there. They're building a hospital in Central Park across from Mount Sinai to
I saw that on
house.
the news.
Yeah. And, I think what's so interesting is that what this pandemic is doing is in some ways equalizing everyone, meaning that we're all susceptible. So yeah, you could talk a little bit about age or pre-existing conditions, but at the same time, the virus is, the way in which it's working with the human organism.
It doesn't discriminate, right? It just lands where it lands.
Right. And then, you'll see, someone like David Geffen, in California, the music mogul, posting on Instagram this large picture of his yacht saying, oh, I hope you all stay safe or whatever. Had to get out of and how tone deaf that is to the people who no doubt have enjoyed some of his music over the years, right? But at the same time, the lived experience of the people who are in New York City delivering food to people in, like, for example, my building. I live in a co-op, as many people do here in New York City, which is an apartment building where you actually own the apartment, but it is a collective sort of community where you're sort of aware of one another's comings and goings, and it is a bit of a lived community. And the people who are delivering the food are people of color. The people who are, driving the Ubers or the Lyfts or the cabs are generally speaking, they could be immigrants. They could be, people whose first language isn't English. I sit here in the intersection where I am in Brooklyn of sort of a Bengali, Muslim, Islamic, Southeast Asian community on the one side, a Mexican, Central American, Salvadoran community on the south side. On the other side, it's sort of the Midwood, the Hasidic, Orthodox Jewish community. And then on the other side, it's sort of like the yuppie, sort of more, upper middle class folks that, have young families and are predominantly white. And what you'll see is in Queens, which has a lot of immigrants, in the Bronx, which has a lot of, Blacks, African Americans, that the death rate is higher, that the infectious rate is higher because of things like density. You don't have big apartments. You don't have second homes that you can flee to. A lot of people who live in the tri-state area might have a home upstate or out in the Hamptons or in somewhere in Vermont or New England or something like that, that they left here to go to. And that's just not an option. And if you have multiple jobs where you're, handling bags at the airport, or you're, you're, prepping food for people or delivering it, or you're delivering laundry or the newspaper or any of these things.
You're coming into close contact. Yeah.
You're not only, you're coming into close contact, and then you may already be returning home to a family of 5 or 6 or 7 in a 1-bedroom or in a studio apartment to begin with, where you already are sleeping in shifts, or you have multiple generations living under the same roof, or you may or may not be insecurely housed in the sense that you may or may not be in a good living situation to begin with, meaning it could be a shelter, or it could be a, you may not be in, you may rent, you may be behind on rent, there's a variety of factors that are at play. And I think there's moves to be doing a rent freeze or pause right now. But the COVID pandemic has shown 2 things. One, that structural inequality and systemic inequality, the cracks and the fissures are affecting where the breakdown actually is. So the system works kind of as designed, in the sense that, when you talk about the wealth gap, when we talk about redlining and gerrymandering, and, we talk about different Jim Crow laws, and we talk about things in terms of the history of, the legacy of enslaved people and the way that shows up, the school to prison pipeline, the incarceration rate for Black men and women for nonviolent offenses, and all kinds of things, you see that those who have been the inheritors of certain systemic policies around economics and whatnot are the ones who are able to sort of get away. I read an article.
They have a lot more options, right?
Options, yeah.
And they don't get incarcerated nearly at the rates, even for similar crimes.
And Rikers Island is just a teeming. Those people are in and out, and the workers who are there, the
guards,
I think they call them COs. Yeah. They're not there. They're in and out, and those folks are stuck. And how do you manage that? It was already over capacity. It's already, planned to be shut down. But these are human beings. These are people. That is like I mean, just thinking about it, it's like a slave ship, but it's not. It's on this island. I mean, it's just, a lot of people don't know that half of the people in the Middle Passage died, when they came over. 15 million people out of the people who were brought over from Africa to be part of the labor force and owned and auctioned. This is the inheritance that is lived out today and repeating itself in some ways today. I mean, I may sound hyperbolic, but what I'm trying to get at is, let's make the connection that the lived experience of people who are in non-dominant or marginalized positions tends to be one where they are more exposed to getting coronavirus and also potentially dying of it, because they may have pre-existing health conditions, as we often know that a lot of people have, Black women, we know there's higher infant mortality and, are offered less pain meds when they go in to deliver, and that there's, telomeres that are, frayed more, and therefore the genes are less, I don't know if the word is resilient, but, that there's all kinds of physiological issues that are inherited in certain populations and carried forward already. So those pre-existing conditions have to do with economics.
And also not being able to afford medication or healthcare or the right kind of support from the medical field. All of that plays in.
So policy and structural and systemic issues affect these populations in a very direct and real way. It's not just, oh, well, if you worked harder or saved your money, or if you, did this or that, or if you were smarter and you didn't, flunk out of school. Well, so many kids, they're homeless and they're going to school anyway. They live in shelters with a single mom and they go to school anyway. Now that they're homeschooled, what are they doing for food? And they don't have iPads. They don't have 5 laptops that they can just go and sit in the other room, and you know what I mean?
Right.
And, the city they sort of dragged its heels on that a little bit, because there was, in terms of I won't even call it social distancing. I'll call it physical distancing, because we still need the emotional connection. But they dragged their heels because they were like, well, where are these kids going to go? Some of them don't have homes, don't have food, and don't have clean clothes. Mm-hmm. So if we don't let them come to school, where are they going to go? That's the lived reality of a lot of New York children and families. And so, now they have these grab and go lunches where the kids can pick up, lunch 3 times a week. And, they've tried to supply online learning tablets and whatnot to families at home. But what if you have a domestic violence situation, or,
that's what I'm really concerned about. That's going way up. Right.
Or what if you are homeless and, you're kind of in between, like living in a car? What do? You can't socially distance. So the idea of, I've been in a lot of circles where, and online groups with different therapists and stuff, and just so frustrated that they're like, oh, I wish there was something I could do, and I'm going to offer a free group, or I'm okay. That's nice. But let's actually lean into the deeper issues that are at play here. And as opposed to just offering something out of a place of making you feel better because you feel helpless, take the time and actually do some of these courses, like Patty Dye's Racism course, or Wide Awake's course, or Dr. Joy DeGrew's online course, or start reading books around what are the origins of this inequity. Or if you don't care, check and ask why I don't care, or why it doesn't occur to me. Maybe I do care, but why does it not occur to me? Or maybe I would care if I was more aware. Or maybe I'm feeling like I can't manage my own anxiety because I'm afraid if I'm going to get, as one of my millennial clients calls it, the Rona, which I have to just say it because it makes me, I know, but I mean, there has to be a moment of levity somewhere in this craziness. That instead of just talking about, oh, I'm going to make blueberry pancakes today instead of chocolate brownies, or I'm going to do this silly thing on YouTube or Instagram or videos and, play checkers and not chess. There are a lot of folks who are in privileged positions who are showcasing their privilege, which is, in ways that, in a way, makes me kind of scratch my head. And I'm just like, yeah, okay, well, you can also lean into equity, rent freezes, calling the senators, signing these petitions that are going around in terms of getting people out of Rikers, or out of, able to have landlords, put a suspension on that. There are ways to get involved that are in solidarity with, or there are ways to spend time at home and shelter at home in ways that are able to help you be in a place where you have a better framework for understanding why it is this way, as opposed to just going down the spiral of, oh my God, we have so many cases, or gee, New York, I don't know if I should leave and move to Florida, or whatever. Well, you can lean into this. If you're privileged enough to be watching us right now, you could lean into this a little and use it as an opportunity. So I'm trying to call in, not call out. Mm-hmm. I really am. Mm-hmm. This isn't a shame thing. I don't want anybody to feel bad. I just want to be like, oh, I didn't think of that. Okay.
Right, right.
That's
Maybe there's more I can learn here about everybody's situation.
right. Because it's so obvious where the fractures are. It would be like, oh, if you knew you played baseball, but you were a pitcher and you broke your right arm when you were in 8th grade, but when you were 24 and you were pitching, you felt a twinge and whatever, and then it snapped. Yeah, because it already had been broken there.
Right, right, right.
So of course that's the place that's going to be a little bit more vulnerable, you know? And so this is exposing that, and it's also exposing our connection. And I think that it's starting to make people who are in privileged positions feel as anxious around their own safety and well-being and not in control of it, as a lot of people of color or in marginalized communities have always felt and do feel now even more. It's in a way becoming a great equalizer,
Mm-hmm.
which could be a portal to collective liberation, which I'm hoping for, because there has to be some kind of a sense of solidarity around this in a way that's embodied and not just performed, in a way that's like, oh, wow, like I'm noticing that now I actually feel like there's nothing I can do to protect myself, or these are just the things I can do. And we know fight, flight, freeze, or fix, or fawn, or whatever. Oh, I can just sort of hide or stay at home. Yeah, but imagine when you don't have that as an option and you're a person of color and you feel that way already, but you have to go out there and live in the world and do things. And of course, I can't speak for all people of color, and I can't speak for every marginalized population. And of course, I'm not trying to. I'm saying that they're carrying often, as a cultural group, a certain amount of anxiety or challenge because of structural issues, things that are beyond their control, but not beyond our collective control, which is why the invitation of leaning in and being involved and engaged and stuff like that, I think is important to think about. If we're going to be here for a little while, maybe how are we going to really use the time?
Well,
We could use it for some good.
We can use it. I mean, one of the things I'm using it to is I've been on lots of podcasts and webinars, and then I sometimes have to take a break and do something, like take a walk
Yeah,
or be out in the sunshine,
yeah.
but
Right.
we do have an opportunity. I sometimes think about all the times I've said, oh, I'm so busy, I wish I could just have a month where I could add a month to the year or something, and then here we are. Um,
Yes. The
Not that this is the
pause.
way I ever imagined it, but and I don't really, because I'm doing so much online, I'm actually working more than I was working before, because I'm trying
Right.
to, impart some information. Hopefully it's helpful.
And you
Um,
are.
but
And you are.
it is time that we could use for learning, whatever and this is one of the topics that I feel is really, really important for all of us to stretch into and lean into, like you're suggesting. There's a lot to know. There's a lot to become more sensitive about. There's a lot of things that challenge your worldview and your relationship view, and all of that I think is it's, especially in our field. I mean, really, in the world, this is important, but in the United States and in our profession, I think for us to really learn and educate ourselves is really important. And of course, that includes Indigenous struggles and all marginalized communities, and sexual orientation challenges, and
Yeah.
transgender challenges. All of this is so. What I appreciate about this era, I guess, in a way, is that this is being talked about more, and it needs more than talk. I mean, talk, understanding, and learning is the beginning, right? And then more and more action and how we are in the world needs to shift as well. But I feel like there are so many resources now. Then there probably have been for a long time, but people didn't dig into them. But I just feel like there's a sort of a collective energy moving in this direction more than I was aware of before. I mean, either I was completely clueless before, but I feel like it's a building orientation that I'm deeply appreciative of. And
Well, it's like when someone identifies like a call of a bird, for example, and we
right.
never knew that, oh, that's what that kind of bird is. And then you hear it everywhere.
Right. No, I'm seeing it everywhere, and even the way I listen to the news. That again, I think is mostly. I mean, they're trying to have some uplifting stuff, but also I think I'm suggesting people do a little bit of a media fast, not be on it
For
too much,
sure.
because it's so terrifying, and they tend, of course, to highlight which their job is to put information out there, but sometimes being too exposed to it can be really
It's
traumatizing.
to keep
So
you glued to the TV. Trust me, I was a news anchor for 20 years and
yeah,
I know what it is.
yeah,
It's to
yeah.
make sure that, and whatever, you do, and to get out some information. But I don't think everybody should be watching the news. Get what you need 5 or 10 minutes in the morning or at night in order to make sure that if things have changed, that you're
Check
aware
it
of.
on a website or something that's not as
Yeah,
visual, and also to protect your children from hearing it too much. Having it running all the time in the background can be really, really scary for little ones. So you want to filter the information that they're getting, and also how much they're on screens. And I
right.
mean, now it's even more challenging than it used to be, because there's so many outlets that kids can be
And
engaging in, or that might not really be serving
and kids
their.
are home from school. And I just want to also say that frontline workers too, like we were talking about marginalized populations who are dying or who are affected or infected by the COVID virus, there's a lot of people who are frontline workers who are people who are doctors and nurses and people who are in the hospitals, people who are the EMTs and whatnot, who are also risking their lives. And these are folks from, the Ivy League schools that have a lot of privileged folks in many ways who have ascended into professions including higher education, like becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer, becoming an MBA.
Mhm.
Well, lawyers and MBAs aren't affected, but the doctors are, right?
Right, right.
So it's an interesting piece there because I have friends, classmates, people that I've known for 20 or 30 years who are doing this work, and they're terrified because they don't have PPE, personal protective equipment. They don't have masks. They don't
It's an
have.
it's so dire. I mean, this situation is not to have the equipment and not to have protection, and then still, I mean, my goodness, this heroism of putting yourself in a position to try to help other people when you can't protect yourself. And then not to be given, not that we aren't producing fast enough. I mean, it's starting to produce, but not way late, I think, but at least it's getting started, to get the equipment you need to help people heal and to protect yourself. It's really.
It's maddening. And also I think what you're pointing to is also, and again, this isn't a conversation about who's right or who's wrong. It's about
Hmm.
what's skillful or what's unskillful.
Right, right.
Okay, this is just not about good or bad, right or wrong. It's about what's helpful. Well, if the agenda is saving lives, we would have done different things a long time ago, a month ago, 2 months ago. One of my friends in China is my focusing partner. So that's getting in touch with the felt sense. It's sort of a basis of a lot of things that we do for things like somatic experiencing or things
Right,
like,
right. Eugene Gendlin's
EMDR.
work, it's beautiful.
Right. Yeah. And he's in Wuhan, China, or he was. And then he was going to his sister-in-law's wedding in another province. And when his family went there for the wedding, for Spring Festival, everything was starting to cook over there. And he was in quarantine for a couple of weeks, thinking that he might have been infected. And he's
Hmm.
still staying at a family member's house now. And I've been traveling through this journey with him for the last few months,
Wow.
from China, mentally, emotionally, physically, from this very intimate, focusing, felt sense place around having his cat be in his apartment, but having him be away with his family. And who could take care of his cat when everybody's not told to leave their apartment, even in his apartment building? And have the relief of having someone be able to do that and give some food or some kitty litter or whatever it is. And how human that is, from
Hmm.
all the way over there to me 2 months ago, having this beautiful person that I've gotten to know and that I really appreciate share the terror, and being on the receiving end of it, not having had it be here yet, knowing that it could travel because that's the way that it was happening, and then having our folks here sort of not have the kind of restrictions that we could have had sooner, that would have prevented the kind of casualties that we see now. So there are decisions that were made. If you look at epidemiology and you look at public health and you look at science and statistics and what we already know to be true about SARS and Ebola and the pandemics that we've seen in the past, there are ways to have mitigated this from the front end. But again, once the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, it can wreak havoc that if it were more contained, this is containment in a good way on the front end, then we wouldn't be where we are now. So I think, again, having the both and approach, the non-dual approach, yes, we have to deal with what's on the front lines and what we're facing right now and do what we can, but also let's not forget how we got here, and let's prevent the kind of ignoring or
Right.
ignorance or whatever it is on the front end. And that takes a social engagement, not from a Stephen Porges polyvagal theory way, although it does, but that takes active engagement and civic engagement, and not, we can't consumeritize our way out of it. We can't just buy another thing on Amazon there. We have to be civically engaged at a certain level in order to make sure that these kinds of things can happen. And that is our part. And
encouraging people to obey the restrictions. There's still people that
now
are
that they're
ignoring
here.
them. Yeah, that's
Well, we
really
had the USS Comfort ship come in yesterday, the
right.
medical hospital, and there
Right.
were people out to welcome it, like it was Fleet Week.
Mm,
I mean,
mm,
that's, where the New Yorkers are together
right.
amassing to welcome. Well, yes, of course, it's beautiful to have the ship come, but appreciate it from afar.
Right, exactly. Keep your physical distance. I know
Right.
I know with trauma, sometimes people do, when they're overwhelmed, go into denial or go into dissociation. So it's one of the things that it's good that the media keeps saying about all the things like the distancing and the hand washing and all the other things you can do. And how that's so important part of the solution. And I would hope that people would be listening to the news of other countries, because they've been through a lot of, when they didn't distance, right, the ramifications, and when they did get it really contained, that's even happening in a differential state to state. Different governors managing their states differently. I know one of my colleagues lives in Memphis, and they didn't do the containment very early, but Kentucky next door apparently did. So Kentucky's a much better place, in terms of being a little bit more flatter, not having the curve so much, whereas Tennessee is the opposite.
Right.
So
And our country's founded on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we have this idea of, well, it's spring break and all the kids should be able to go down and do what they want to do and whatever it is. But there is a cost to that. And it's not just a self-interested cost. It is a collective cost.
right.
And there are so many collective costs. You talk about dissociation and how that's trauma response. Well, I think that there are a lot of folks who are in privileged positions who have a collective dissociation culturally
Right.
around what we're tuned into or not. And this
Mm-hmm.
is yet another reminder of not of recognizing it and leaning into it and saying, okay, well, that's a trauma response because, I'm not used to being attuned to not just sacrificing my individual liberty and choice for the collective well-being, but I need to also know how to do this. I can take care of me, and I can also be a part of this system and participate as a good citizen and steward of this collective system that I'm in. So it's the both and there. And if more people can just keep that in mind, I mean, no, we're not a collectivist culture. People go crazy when we say words like communist or socialist or whatever it is. Well, fine, we don't have to say those words. But we can also say, let's be mindful of the fact that what we do
Affects many, many
inevitably
other
affects
people.
many other people, and that it always has, but this virus is exacerbating that and
Yeah.
highlighting that.
Well, we're in it right now, and there's so much to be learned from it, and there's so many tragedies to understand and help grieve, but also I imagine there'll be some gifts that are born from it too, and I hope it does take us in the direction of being more globalized or more collectively oriented and cooperative in that way, and honoring in that way, and I think the great equalizer, like you said, I think that brings some awareness too, that we're all vulnerable and we all have the susceptibility. And if we need to do best practices, I think that's really been hammered in, but it needs to continually be hammered in because some people are still ignoring it. And I just kind of wanted to highlight in this conversation that we also need, that you've spoken to so beautifully, that we also need to really lean in and acknowledge and learn more about what's happening for the less privileged and the more marginalized groups. And I certainly, prisons are one of them, where people are kind of forced to be together in a way. And how do we protect the guards? How do we protect the staff? How do we protect the inmates? And how do we, I know in California, I listened to the governor just yesterday, he's working out a program for nonviolent offenders to be released early. And if they've been in the
Yeah.
parole, line up to expedite that and fast track that and move people back into their homes and communities in a safe way as quickly as possible. So I know some governors of different states are really taking that as a very strong focus. So there are
Yeah.
people are starting to put in social practices that I think have needed to happen. I mean, ideally a long time ago, but they're starting to happen now, and hopefully will have a positive effect in the long run. Certainly better than keeping it the way it is, right?
Right.
And I hope the government and the governors of each of individual states start to see what's really working and follow the what's working versus the I'm going to ignore this. Or I've heard from certain, you know, kind of strong community religious sectors of they have this idea that it's just God's will and they don't need to, God will choose who dies and who lives, and they're not really following the practices. But even if that's the truth on some level, the practices are still really important, you know.
Right.
That's not an excuse to ignore the practices. So I just feel, you know, when people have such a financial stress, I think people have financial stress anyway, especially in the marginalized communities and in certain aspects of that, don't have the same economic advantages. And
Right.
then to add this level of stress on top of it just feels really hard. And I do really wonder, I think about what happens if a single mom with, you know, 3 or 4 kids or one kid gets sick. What happens if they don't have family or friends that will take over and house that child, you know? And this would be, there's just a lot of heartbreaking situations that I think
It's
are
exposing,
beyond the virus, you know, that are
yeah, it's
happening. And
exposing a lot of the places where there were so many vulnerabilities to begin with, I think.
yeah,
And that,
yeah,
you know, one thing we can do is definitely tip people really amazingly. Like everybody, like just tip a lot. Like if you would tip $10, tip 100.
right,
I don't, you know
right,
what I mean?
right, right.
And then also like keep people employed or working for you who aren't working for you. So if it's your housekeeper, if you have that kind of a privileged position,
Mm-hmm.
give them the $200 a month anyway, or whatever it is, to do it
Right,
anyway,
right.
not to have them come, but to
Mm-hmm.
actually just keep their income afloat. Because again, if you have it, it's one of those things where this is a time when we need to lean on one another. I
Right.
always, you know, said community is by nature, true community is by nature interdependent. It
Yes.
is interdependent by nature, but we have been living a transactional life with, you know, sort of suburbs and nuclear families and individual, you know, McMansions. And that's maybe nice sometimes, but then we wonder why we feel lonely and isolated and not connected. So it's kind of like,
Exactly.
huh? You know, like,
Yeah.
but now you would be safe from COVID if you had a big house you could run back to, but you might feel more connected if you were actually one of those people that was in the 5-bedroom, I mean, 5 to a 1 room apartment in New York. So it's interesting, right? Actually, what we need as humans to keep us going, and our heart space. That's what's so heartbreaking about this is, I think it's really showing also the dysfunction in our system of, it's good to be independent, sure, but we really actually are interdependent. We
Yes,
know
that's
from
the reality.
psychology there's the differentiation phase. So we're dependent, then we
Mm-hmm.
become, then we individuate and we come out, and then we learn to integrate, and we have
Right.
our, you know, integration, our cohesion, our coherence as a society culturally. And that we don't think that way, and this is the time to start thinking that way, not just about me, but about, Dan Siegel talks about the MWE, MWE. That's what we're in. We never weren't in it. But again, mindfulness practice is about remembering, reconnecting. Like if, you know, the limbs or your members are cut off, it's like remembering. Think of it like maybe a rag doll you're stitching back. This is an opportunity for us to do that to ourselves, our own somas, our own bodies, if we're fortunate enough to still be here or to move through being a little bit sick and then coming through it and being okay, but also our cultural soma. Tata Hosame, Resma Menachem talk about cultural somatics. This is what they mean. It's economic. It's about power, equity, and privilege. It's about access. It's about healthcare. It's about insurance. It's about profits.
How everything's set up. Really, it's so pervasive. That's what I think that's is helpful when you take these courses or read about it or, you know, put yourself in to a way to take it in. It really helps you
Yeah,
see it.
the both and, the wider lens of all of that, and how are we in that, given that today, And then also, what can we commit to as part of our practice going forward about that, right? So
Yeah.
it's a both and. You're not superwoman or superhero or whatever. There's no cape, unless you want to take a towel from the bathroom and tie it around your, neck for your 5-year-old or something, which is great also. That's fine. Have fun in life. Be joyful. We need that. That's part of our resilience. It's just the remembering that we are interdependent. We never were not. This self-sufficiency, this independence, we came into the world literally connected to another human.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of whatever they did or our experience was with them in utero, or in our family of origin subsequently, or if we're an adoptee or whatever it is, that we literally came into the world connected to another body. That's how we come into the world. And that just because we no longer have that particular cord there, because we do individuate, we do have our own ways of being and our own uniqueness and our vitality and our, you say the essence, the Francesca-ness of
Mm-hmm.
Francesca, or the,
Mm-hmm.
we do have the Diane-ness of Diane. We do have that. But how does that coexist? How is that layered into our collective community and communities and how they interact? And I think this is just highlighting that. So we're all our brothers and sisters keepers here, and our feline and canine and animal and plant friends. We are part of this. This is an ecological thing. The planet's doing better because of COVID. We're not emitting as many toxins, the greenhouse gases, the waterways, the production lines. Mother Earth is onto something here. And I'm not implying that, putting harm and a virus into a human body that then is going to cause death and destruction is the answer. But it is an interesting point to note of the interrelatedness of what happens when we pause and slow down. Not only to our families, where we can like play a board game like Monopoly, or, actually talk to a partner, or make a meal and not order out and take the time. Oh, I'll chop the peppers, you make the salad, I'll set the table. When's the last time people did that?
And they're
then
having more time with their kids, and hopefully in a positive way
yeah,
most of the time. They're learning how to have more rhythm in their family life, and hopefully less screen time, and really,
yeah,
really engaging with, again, safe distance, but, being a family, not
right,
being so distracted by the high speed of life that we have sometimes in this culture, just packing things in, or the fear of missing out, the FOMO syndrome,
right.
just really relaxing into being connected to oneself and everyone else, whether you know them or not, but hopefully you're reaching out and connecting emotionally, if not obviously physically right now.
Not for now. Everything passes.
Yeah.
It's one of the key mindfulness teachings. I love the way Ruth King talks about it. She says nothing's permanent, personal, or perfect. And that's
Mm-hmm.
nice. This isn't going to last forever. We'll emerge different, just like trauma in our nervous system, whether it's, complex developmental stuff, or whether or not it's a big shocker or a series of both, or whatever, the whole catastrophe. Use Zorba the Greek.
Well, thank you for this call to wake up more. And is there anything else you'd like to say, or do you feel like you'd like to land it for now, or any other?
Diane, I'm appreciative of the invitation, and New Yorkers, thank you also. New York is strong, and
Yes.
we'll be all right. We're in it together. Thank
Right.
you.
Well, I love New York. I've taught there for so many times. I love being there and I have a lot of friends there, and of course, all around the world and country, and wishing everybody to stay safe and be well. And I know we will lose some people, and that'll be very, very hard for us. So I want to acknowledge that. And in the times we're together, for everyone that's on the call today, the times we're together, we'll be trying to address some of your concerns as you share them with me, and sometimes just bearing witness to what's happening is what it needs to happen. So thank you so much, Francesca, for your generosity. I really appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you to everyone. Be well, stay safe.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, and goodbye for now. Take care. Be well.